боремося.
Ukrainian president addressed a special session of European Union Parliament where he hailed Ukraine for being strong and fighting diligently. He further urged for global support against Russia. He received a standing ovation at the end of his speech. Take a look.
І за те, щоб бути рівноправними членами Європи.
Showing everybody that's exactly what we are. The European Union is going to be much stronger with us, so that's for sure. Without you, Ukraine is going to be lonely, lonesome. We have proven our strength. We have proven that as at a minimum, we are exactly the same as you are. So do prove that you are with us. Do prove that you will not let us go. Do prove that you indeed are Europeans. And then life will win over death and light will win over darkness. Glory be to Ukraine.
Is stress keeping you up at night? Stuck thinking about the day or worrying about tomorrow? Headspace is here for you with tools to de-stress before bed and sleep soundly through the night. Put your mind to bed with Headspace at headspace.com.
Welcome back. Here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. As the Russian juggernaut seems to be unforgiving on the Ukrainians, the world continues to debate ways to get Russia to halt its invasion. While the ongoing Ukraine-Russia talks are not yielding any results and the conflict is turning into a war of attrition and a humanitarian crisis. We are now joined on the show by India's former ambassador to Russia, P.S. Raghavan, to give us a diplomat's perspective into how the crisis could really unfold. Ambassador Raghavan has also headed India's National Security Advisory Board, which advises the Indian government on strategic affairs. Welcome to the show, Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Firstly, how will you like to react on how the situation has unfolded in the last 6 days? Today is the 6th day of this war between Russia and Ukraine. Tomorrow, second round of talks are going to happen. Do you have any hopes?
Thanks for having me. Well, I think one thing that we can say is that what is going on now is an unmitigated tragedy. I was saying earlier about an Indian student who lost his life, unfortunately, and so many Indian students in great difficulty in bunkers and fearing for their lives. But it's out there, it is an even greater tragedy for the Europeans, for the Ukrainians, and so on. You asked how you think the war will proceed or how you think developments will proceed. I think the problem that the world has had today is in decoding the mind and the intentions of President Putin. We know the Russian grievances with NATO that actually led to this. We know the various issues of Russia's security that has led to this. But where is this going in terms of reassuring Russia about its security, and where is it going in terms of the West? They've imposed the harshest sanctions that have ever been imposed on any country other than North Korea and Venezuela and Iran. So how is that going to influence Russian behavior? All of this is still to be seen. Now, we've had one round of talks. What's good is that you're having another round of talks. That is itself a sign of hope. But it's very, very difficult to see how both sides are going to come away with a win-win solution, because only that will stop this tragedy of the war at the moment.
But what will be that win-win solution, Ambassador? Because Ukraine wants complete ceasefire. Ukraine wants Russian troops out of its territory. Russia wants, some reports are suggesting, some sort of a written agreement. Can't just be about NATO.
Yeah, actually, you throw your mind back to what happened before the Russian invasion. Before the Russian invasion, there were talks between the US and Russia on what can broadly be called the totality of Russian security concerns. Now, in that, there were essentially two elements. One of them was Ukraine, which is that, of course, Russia talks about the Minsk agreements, Russia talks about Ukraine not joining NATO. But if you boil it down to what it means is that Russia wants an assurance that NATO's forces will not be deployed in Ukraine and that Ukraine will become some kind of a neutral country. The concept of neutrality in Europe is well known also. So this is the general objective. And what you might look at in terms of a solution is that, yes, Ukraine wants a ceasefire, Ukraine wants Russia to withdraw. Now, for Russia also, it is not sustainable to be sitting in Ukraine. Russia cannot control Ukraine. So Russia will have a ceasefire and will withdraw. But the elements of the agreement on the basis of which Russia will withdraw, at least as far as what I think the Russians want at the moment, is some kind of a guarantee of Ukraine's neutrality. Now, today you played the clip a while ago about Ukraine wanting to join the European Union. Joining the European Union is an economic arrangement which Russia may not like, but that is not Russia's red line. If the European Union can see its way to sort of helping Ukraine, it will not do so, because the European Union actually only admits countries in roughly the same level of economic development as itself, which Ukraine is most certainly not. But it can enter into a process of partnership which eventually leads to membership of the EU. And that's something that's aligned to Ukraine. But from a security point of view, what Russia really wants is some kind of a guarantee. It can be in many forms: neutrality of Ukraine, some kind of an agreement that NATO deployments will not be in Ukraine. A variety of such formulae are there. And that is but those are not something that Russia can negotiate with Ukraine. They have to be negotiated with the US and NATO. And right now, there is no indication that US and NATO are entering into an agreement with Russia, enter into even a dialogue with Russia on these matters. And that is where the problem is.
Ambassador Raghavan, did US allow it to happen? Did US allow us to see this kind of a situation?
Sorry, I didn't catch the first part of your question. The line was not good. Could you repeat that?
I was trying to understand, sir, is the action of US behind what we are witnessing today, what the world is witnessing today? Could we have avoided this?
Well, look, certainly we could have avoided this, but that is a very long, drawn-out issue. The Russian grievances about the US-led NATO advancing towards Russia and all these countries neighboring Russia becoming members of NATO, that's a grievance. But what actually the Russians wanted was a dialogue that would also enable Russia to fit into the security architecture of Europe. And that is what has not happened. After the Cold War, the entire US and NATO decided to act like a winner crushing the loser, which worked all right as long as Russia was weak. And Russia then had to submit to this, what it considered the humiliation of NATO advancing and NATO weaponry being directed at it from all across its border. Now, if there had been a certain element of pragmatism at that time between the West and Russia, on the part of the West really, to have a dialogue with Russia to make sure that there is some kind of a security equilibrium in Europe, then this would not have happened. But that's a long story, and that's a story of the past. We now have to see how we can repair that in the present and the future.
So going forward, you said, sir, Russia will agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine. On what condition do you really see that happening? Because, last week, we were getting information that the process of de-escalation has begun because Russia was going to send some of its troops to the eastern part of Ukraine as peacekeepers, which of course the US said was complete nonsense. So at that time, the sense was that Russia's only issue with Ukraine is that it does not want Ukraine to be a member of NATO. But now, given the current circumstances, what I want to understand from you is, because you understand Russia pretty well, what does Vladimir Putin really want? Does he want to capture Ukraine? Does he want to throw the current regime out, the political regime that is there? Or does he just want this kind of a written assurance that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO? It will, the assurance that you just described for our viewers.
Okay, let me start by saying nobody knows the mind of Vladimir Putin other than Vladimir Putin. That's a given. But if you look at what Russia wanted, I mean, as I said, as you yourself said, that de-escalation, see, right until the last minute, I think Russia was negotiating with the US because it felt that the US was the only one which could determine the outcome. It was actually negotiating with the US and NATO to try to get this package of security concerns approved. In fact, I must say, some other confidence-building measures had been agreed upon already, you know, about the placement of missiles in various parts of NATO facing Russia and so on. So various bits and pieces of this package had been agreed. What finally could not be agreed, and this actually comes from the time that Presidents Biden and Putin met in Geneva in June last year, where all these items on the agenda were there. The item on the agenda that could not get resolved because of conflicting interests of the US and various NATO countries. In fact, that's too complicated to go into. But because of that, the guarantee that Russia was looking for on Ukraine, it did not get. And then President Putin took this decision to invade Ukraine. I don't think it's a good decision. But the reason behind it is he thought that by this, he would force the West to come to this guarantee that he wanted on Ukraine. I don't think Russia can achieve anything by occupying Ukraine. It has economic problems of its own. It cannot gain anything by occupying Ukraine and adding to its economic goals.
Ambassador Raghavan, we've been discussing this story, continuously here on Mirror Now, and we've also got a sense when the first round of talks happened between Russia and Ukraine, some experts were of the view that probably Russian president is trying to buy some more time because even he did not really anticipate the barrage of sanctions that followed after, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Do you see that impacting Russia in any way?
Look, these sanctions, as I think I mentioned before, are the harshest that have ever been imposed on Russia. And in fact, harsher than has ever been imposed on countries other than, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela. They will certainly have an impact. Of course, the fine print of these sanctions is still to be revealed. But when you cut Russia off the banking system, when you cut Russia off the SWIFT system, and now you even have extraordinary stories like BP and other oil majors who have huge investments in Russia are actually withdrawing from those investments, which means loss to them actually of billions and billions of dollars. So when this kind of heavy pressure, and from the US, from their NATO allies, from Australia, from Japan, around the world, this will have an impact. But let us remember that sanctions are not a weapon which only goes in one direction. They are a double-edged sword because Russia is the major hydrocarbons exporter. Russia is a major supplier of wheat to the world. Russia is also natural resources from copper to nickel to cadmium to lithium to all kinds of, not lithium, sorry, all kinds of natural resources. Russia is a major exporter. So if you impose such heavy sanctions on Russia that it cannot use the financial systems to export, then Europe and the rest of the global economy, we will suffer greatly as well because commodity prices will go up hugely, oil and gas prices will go up hugely. Therefore, the pressure that is being applied on Russia is meant to reach an early solution, to get Russia to withdraw the conditions that led to the sanctions. So I think that is an important element in the force with which the Western countries are going into these sanctions. The hope is that these sanctions do not have to be kept for too long, that Russia will eventually come to the negotiating table and you can reach an agreement that enables you to withdraw the sanctions.
Ambassador Raghavan, we're just getting information that Ukrainian TV channels have stopped broadcasting several minutes ago because there has been an attack at the TV tower in the capital city of Ukraine, and we've got the visuals as well. What do you make of this latest development ahead of the second round of talks between both the countries?
Actually, that's again a very sad thing, but when you see more and more such civilian establishments being targeted, it gives you an indication of the difficulties in actually bringing the war under control in your direction. Now, as far as the talks go, there are two things about talks. One is that when they agreed to the talks, they did not say that there would be a ceasefire while the talks are going on. So there was no commitment on either side that they would stop fighting while the talks are going on. The second and more important thing, I think, is that Russia and Ukraine, I don't think, can arrive at any decision that can satisfy Russia. Because as we talked about earlier, Russia's concerns are much larger than Ukraine. Ukraine has most unfortunately become the victim of actually a larger battle between Russia and NATO. And it's a tragedy that the people of Ukraine have got stuck in this. The larger battle is between NATO, US-led NATO and Russia. So unless the West, the US and NATO in some way, it's possible that through the Ukraine they may convey a message. But unless they can reach an agreement with Russia, I do not see how Russia and Ukraine can sort out anything about a ceasefire or anything about a decision.
One more question, sir. How should India really now respond? Do you think pressure is now building on India to, support one country?
As far as this is concerned, we have been through this even in 2014. When the Russians annexed Crimea, there was very great pressure on us to condemn the Russian action. We didn't do so. As far as India is concerned, India has to look at its interests. India has to look at what its relationships are with all the countries involved. And also India has to look at its geography and the geopolitics which follows from its geography. So if you see that, and if you see our relations with the US are excellent, they're better than they've ever been before. Our relations with Russia are very strong, particularly because of two aspects. One is our defense cooperation, and the other is our cooperation in that Eurasian space, Central Asia and area where Russia and China both occupy. Now, these are factors of both geography and history. So we cannot actually, just condemning one side to please the other actually doesn't serve any purpose. We want diplomacy, we want dialogue. We've been asking for diplomacy and dialogue, and we have excellent relations with Ukraine as well. As I think you reported in your program that our Prime Minister talked to the Ukrainian President as well. So we have excellent relations with all. But, taking a side does not help the battle. This is not a war of our creation. This is a war of the creation of all those people who are fighting the war, actually. Russia, NATO, and Ukraine. Well, I was involved in this. Therefore, we can do no better than to ask them to settle the issues between them through diplomacy and dialogue. And that is what our PR said at the UN the other day. That's what our Prime Minister said to President Putin when he talked to him. And what our Prime Minister said to President Zelensky when he talked to him. So there is no point in our just grandstanding for the sake of grandstanding.
Okay. Interesting point you've made there, sir. Ambassador Raghavan, thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening and helping us understand the situation. We'll, of course, see what happens during the second round of talks that are supposed to happen tomorrow between Russia and Ukraine. Thank you for joining us.